Hey guys, this is Jay and I'll be teaching you Beginning Java Lesson 6. Alright, let's start with the warm-up. So I want you to create a function that takes in an integer array and assigns a random value to each location. So you can pause the video here and try that on your own. Alright, now let's go over the solution. So here we have public static int array assign values, and it takes in an int array and then it returns one as well. So we have a for loop here going from int I equals 0 to I is less than array.length. So this is just going through every single element in the array. And then it's creating a random int between 1 and 10. And then it's assigning that int to int array of whatever the current index is. And then at the end, it's going to return the changed array. So we just have one review question here. What is an array? Arrays are very similar to containers. They hold specific data values like strings, int, chars, etc. in a given location. Now let's go over our project, which is Rock, Paper, Scissors Part 1. What are we going to need for this project and how do we start? Well, there are a couple important questions I want you guys to consider, and at the very end of this lesson, we're actually going to go over them and answer them. First, how does the computer play? Second, how is the player's input received? And third, how do we tell if a player or computer wins a round? So first, let's set up the main method. Once you create a main method, you're going to create and name a scanner. And don't forget to import scanner at the top. Import scanner at the top. Second, you're going to make a string array filled with 3 options that a player can pick: rock, paper, or scissors. Next, you're going to make a Boolean variable called want-to-play-again and set it to true. Then another Boolean variable called first-game and set it to true. Finally, you're going to make an int variable called lives and set it to 3. I'll let you pause the video here and give you a second to do that. And now let's go over the solution. So this is what you should have. First, the string array options, and this is a funky format. Basically, instead of actually saying the specific string array, just the length, and then later adding every single element individually, it's just saying all of the elements in the string array automatically. So this is a shorter way to assign all of the values in a string array. Next, we're initializing a scanner, and then we're creating the booleans and the int. Now let's set up the while loop. So I want you to create a while loop that keeps going as long as you have more than one life. And inside the while loop, you're going to set first game to false. For the computer's play, you're going to get a random number between 0 and 2 because there are 3 play options in rock, paper, scissors. Then you're going to print the amount of lives the player has. You're going to ask for player input, either rock, paper, or scissors. And finally, you're going to tell the player what the computer played. I'm going to give you a second to pause this and create that on your own. Alright, so here's the solution. While lives is greater than 0, you're going to set first game to false. You're going to create a random integer for the computer's play. You're going to print the lives, and then print rock, paper, scissors and get the input using scanner. And finally, you're going to print what the computer got. And we're just going to say options of rand, because remember we had the string array options. So we can just use rand as the index to print out whichever string it happened to choose. Next, we're going to write our computer versus player method. So I want you to make a method called computer versus player to calculate who won. And this is going to take 2 parameters, what the player played and what the computer played. You're going to check if the player and the computer gets the same thing, which is a tie, or if they get different things, in which case someone won and someone lost. If the player won, return 1. If the computer won, return -1. And if it's a tie, return 0. You can pause the video here, and I'll give you a second to do that. Alright, now that you've attempted it on your own, let's go over the solution. So here's some example code. Now, at first this looks like a lot, but in reality, all this is a series of if statements. First, it's basically checking all of the possible scenarios. This is checking all of the scenarios if you did rock, this is checking all the scenarios if you did paper, and this is checking the scenarios if you did scissors. And you can see it's returning 1, 0, or -1 depending on the outcome. Now we're going to have to actually call computer versus player. So at the bottom of your while loop, you're going to add the result of computer versus player to lives, the int variable lives. And you're going to pass in two parameters to computer versus player, the player's guess and the computer's guess. And remember, this returns 1 if the player won, 0 if it tied, or -1 if the computer won. Meaning you can actually add whatever the return value of computer versus player is to the int variable lives. You can pause and add this now. Alright, and I'll show you the solution. So all of this is what we've already done. This is the only new line. Lives plus equals, or lives equals lives plus, comp versus player, and then you're inputting choice and options of rand. This is the player's choice, and this is the computer's choice. Finally, let's close out with some review. 1. How does the computer play? The computer picks a random number to choose its play. How is the player's input received? So we use scanner to get the player's input, and then in order to check what the actual input is, we use the function string.equals ignore case, and then string input. So this function returns true if this string is equal to the input, but ignoring uppercase and lowercase. How do we tell if a player or computer wins a round? So we check for each play scenario and update the number of lives accordingly. And that is the end of today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed lesson 6, and thank you for watching.